we managed to get 64 million to actually fund primarily prosecutors in two areas of our work. One is in the specialized commercial crime courts, and the other is in asset forfeiture. And both of these are going to be crucial in terms of the fight against corruption. And that is outside of the investigating directorate that's been created, which I'll talk about that a little bit. So part of our strategy to get back, to turn things around, is to try to get the money back. And a fair percentage of the money stolen from us, from the people of South Africa, by greedy individuals, has left the shores of South Africa. And as asset forfeiture, we need to look at how we could work with a number of countries across the world to try to bring that money back. And that is an important part of our strategy.
Now, over the past few days, we have seen dramatic moves on the part of several agencies and organizations to bring those who were part of the state capture and corruption to book. The US placed sanctions on the infamous Guptas. The properties purported to belong to fraud and corruption charged Zandile Gumede, the former mayor of eThekwini, were raided and attached. And meanwhile, Dudu Myeni, former South African Airways head, is being pursued in a civil case which could see her declared as a delinquent director, stripping her of several lucrative board positions she currently holds. Well, to make sense of how the justice system is going about all of this, I'm joined by OUTA's legal advice, or rather legal officer, Advocate Stephanie Fick, as well as Professor Ivor Chipkan, who is, of course, the co-author of the Shadow State and also the Executive Director of Government and Public Policy. Good morning. Thank you so very much for joining us. Now, a very dramatic move we've seen. This morning in the newspapers, we also read that the Justice Minister is making available some of the top legal minds in the country, ranging from Vin Tremgrove to Advocate Ngogai Tobi, to assist the NPA. In bringing to book these people, because there's a sense that the wheels of justice is turning too slowly. Dr. Chipkan, let me bring you in here. You wrote a really interesting paper on the phenomena of state capture, and in the conclusion you say that the initiatives to investigate and root out state capture in South Africa, at the Zondo Commission, like at the Nugent Commission, are confronted with the depths and depravity of the ruling elite. Yet the extent to which the Commission's analysis remain anchored in terms of concepts like corruption and looting alone is limiting, because it will miss out on its potential. And you say, for state capture was not simply a system of criminality and misconduct. It was driven by a conception of politics that weakened the state. The Commission is in a position to help us draw conclusions to that post-capture epoch, which is heralded in, which of course talks to the question of, can you execute swift justice with a broken justice system?
So, Karima, thank you. I think there's an interesting dynamic emerging in South Africa, and I think we're potentially victims of our own success in this regard. I think that there's what the newspapers today are reporting is moves to empower the NPA to take on some of the sort of criminals involved in state capture and prosecute them. And of course, that is to be welcomed. But at the same time, what worries me is that some of the money to fund the NPA is being taken away from the Zondo Commission. Mm-hmm. And there may even be a play at work currently that the Zondo Commission wraps up and hands over all its evidence to the NPA, because essentially to prosecute cases. The problem in my mind with this view is that essentially we reduce state capture to a phenomenon of corruption and criminality, where the target now going forward is to target the bad guys, capture them, put them in jail. I think that's a problem, because what it misses out on is that state capture really speaks to South Africa's political culture. And then two issues in particular. One, and we mustn't lose sight of this, state capture is facilitated by an ideology which I think is still quite deep in our political culture that the South African Constitution was an obstacle to real change,
right,
and that there's a real strong anti-constitutional ethos or culture within certain political parties in South Africa. And the second one was a failure to respect the autonomy or the separation between the political sphere and the administrative sphere, which licensed or gave for the right of politicians to inappropriately interfere in administrative matters or operational matters in departments. Those two, I think, are at the heart of state capture. And as long as we treat it ultimately as corruption and we don't address those two issues, this phenomenon is going to repeat itself.
Advocate Fick, I see you shaking your head. You agree?
Yes, I do. I do think that although we need to work on the NPA, and I want to add in there the Hawks, because the NPA can't function without the Hawks doing the investigation. I wholeheartedly agree that we need to look at how politics are driven in South Africa. Question, who's chairs of all the committees in Parliament? Who's taking responsibility of, although there's no prosecutions yet, who's taking accountabilities and who's enforcing the accountabilities of the people we look up to, we believe should look after the South Africans and us.
Now, this is, of course, a central theme in the paper that you write about, Professor Chipkan. You speak about building a democratic state, and you talk specifically about the autonomous role of civil servants and that they should be free from political machinations of whichever party happens to be in power. What exactly do you mean by that? And in practical terms, what would it mean then to go after someone like Dudu Myeni? Why should a civil case be brought by OUTA to hold it to account? And why can't the Hawks, why can't the NPA do their jobs in that regard?
Because, Karima, I'm Dr. Chipkan, not Professor Chipkan. Just that correction. So I think the professional public service is something which we've been struggling with in South Africa. We took decisions deliberately in the early days of the transition to politicize the administration on the basis that we could not rely on or expect an apartheid-era public administration, or those of the Bantustans, to implement and take forward progressive policies of a new ANC government. And as a result, the idea was that you needed maximum political control over the administration to make sure that public administrators, public servants were doing their jobs. And we took a whole lot of measures structurally and in terms of process to maximize political influence. I think those policies have come to bite us very, very severely. But we still haven't reached, in principle, the idea that we need such a separation. So we are in a state of a deep, profound flux. We take measures to establish the autonomy of the public service. We then undercut those measures with other sorts of measures. I think we need a serious debate in South Africa, which the Zondo Commission, I think, is in a position to help us have, by the way, and which is why I think it would be very sad if the Zondo Commission is reduced in its capacity and in its function, to think seriously about what a public service looks like in South Africa. Elsewhere in the world, professional public service really looks like one that is relatively insulated from political influence in operational matters. What politicians do is they set policy, they decide what needs to be done, and you give leeway to public servants who are professionally appointed, who have great capacity to decide how one implements those policies.
But Advocate Fick, isn't that precisely what the state capturers did to punish those civil servants who wanted to do their jobs? People like Themba Maseko, people like Cebisi Jonas and others, people who were administratively responsible to do certain things, yes, who refused to do the political bidding, and in some cases illegal bidding of their political principles. They were punished, they were removed, many of them had their careers destroyed. So what do we do with this system whilst we are expected to fix it on the one hand, and the very same system needs to go after the bad guys, because there's a desperate need for speedy and swift justice. People want to see the money come back and yes, people go to jail.
Yes. So it is a dual process. I agree that the State Capture Commission has got a big task on its hand, because I think it will have that debate as to how can we change some of the policy and government and politics to separate the two. And then on the other hand, obviously, I think we just look outside. We hear all this corruption, state capture, nothing is being done. And that was supposed to, I think, be a parallel process. You know, on the one hand...
Not one or the other.
Not one or the other. It should have been. And the question is, if state capture, look how far they've gone. I do not some days understand why can't the same thing happen on the other side. Yes, they are struggling. Yes, but can't they share information for one? I don't think that they do.
In fact, this is the question. So on the Nugent Commission of Inquiry, we had a commission of inquiry that was sitting, that was looking at the tax administration under the tenureship of Tom Moyane, but it made a finding before the commission was actually even concluded that he was unfit. And the president, of course, was enabled to immediately sack him. He challenged it, but the commission was quite decisive. The Zondo Commission kind of goes on and on. Many people saying that untested information coming out at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, the right to cross-examine hasn't happened yet. But what we do have is a Hawks that is standing dead still, except for the raids on Zandile Gomede's houses and properties and her associates. By the way, she's appealing that raid and the attachment of her valuables. And then, of course, we have the Zondo Commission of Inquiry. And then we have the NPA. Now, I want to use a particular example. In KwaZulu-Natal, we had a situation where Mwipuni Noko was the provincial head of the NPA. She was at the heart of the state capture project in the sense that she made cases disappear that were linked to prominent people like Edward Zuma, President Zuma's friends, one of the former first ladies, and so on. She is now the head of the NPA in the Northwest. Can Shamila Batoy do her work, Dr. Chipkan, if Mwipuni Noko is the head of the NPA in the Northwest, where a former premier is in fact accused of being part of issuing a hit on a political opponent?
So I think these are awkward, difficult questions, but I think my position here is slightly controversial. I would err on the side of stability rather than the side of disruption. So I've been currently doing a lot of work on state-owned enterprises, for example. And what is unmistakable is the crisis of performance of these institutions is often related, yes, to corruption, but it's often related to the extraordinary turbulence that is brought about by political change and political interference. I mean, the extraordinary interruptions to Eskom's processes that start in 2008, even before that, are just quite incredible. So I think one of the ways of dealing with state capture, ironically enough, is to allow some of the organizations which have been so badly damaged to stabilize. And that often means making very painful decisions of keeping in place certain people that you think are compromised, but who nonetheless have some capacity. And my sense is that with the exposure, under deep surveillance and the public light, these people will perform better than they won't.
Advocate Fick, is that the reason why you guys are going the civil route after Dudu Myeni? Because the Hawks and the NPA have simply not got the capacity to get their act together to go after her. You are pursuing her in a civil case. She's been a no-show. Her lawyers are now demanding that they familiarize themselves with the merits of your case. Is this why you decided as an NGO to pursue the matter civilly?
I think that in two parts, yes. So the answer to that question is yes. The other part is just the fact that SAA is not doing that themselves. And that is a question, is that, yes, the NPA and Hawks is a topic, and we're probably going to have discussions over that for months to come. But why is the SOE not doing something? So, yes, and I'm happy we did it, because I think it's a little bit of good news for South Africans, that at least there is a case that potentially someone will be held accountable. And that if the SOEs are not going to do it, and the NPA and the Hawks, then it's up to us to take some steps. So it's a step in the right direction.
Now, explain to South Africans who are watching this program, how does a civil society organization pursue someone they believe, to be guilty of corruption, or at least have cases to answer, and to prevent them from being recycled? Because you're essentially trying to say that Dudu Myeni is not fit to sit on any board. And of course, we know that people get board fees, so this will be removed removing her from perhaps wreaking the same kind of damage she did on other companies. How do you go about it, and what can South Africans do to pursue these individuals outside of the formal criminal justice system?
Well, in this instance, we used the Companies Act, which is declaring her delinquent director. And although this is not going to get any money from her, like you've stated, it's hopefully we will curtail her ability to obtain or to sit on SOE board if that's
to be recycled.
To be recycled. In this instance, we were approached by whistleblowers. So power to the whistleblowers that stood up and were courageous enough to say enough is enough. And I think you said before is that you have the corrupt that's still in power, that still earns salaries, and then there's the courageous people that are struggling because they are pushed out and they can't get jobs. So kudos to someone like Cynthia Stimple and Tulum that came forward and said we can't. And if it weren't for them, and if it weren't for our supporters that said yes, OUTA, do the work, we wouldn't have been able to do it. So we were in the fortunate position to say yes, we will take this baton and take it forward.
Well, I think that is, of course, the message to everybody, that the state alone cannot do it. There is a role for everyone to play. Dr. Chipkan, thank you so very much. Advocate Fick, thank you so very much. Up ahead, we unpack the weekend newspapers. Stay with us.